Welcome back to Visual Basic for Beginners series. In this lesson, I will discuss arrays. I hope that you have reviewed my earlier tutorials, 5 of them, which discuss a variety of topics, starting with installing Visual Basic 2010 Express Edition, compiling and running the application, a simple application, understanding variables, data types and assignment statements, understanding decision-making statements like if and select case, and then finally the loops for, while, and the do-while loops. The objective of this lesson are to discuss arrays. Arrays are objects, and we will discuss how you can create one or two-dimensional arrays. The objective of this lesson is to learn about arrays, both one and two-dimensional arrays. An array is a collection of variables of the same type. Arrays can have one or more dimensions. Arrays are convenient for holding related variables. For example, daily closing stock prices for a month. An array is a group of variables of the same data type and referred to by a common name. So, why do you need an array? For example, if you want to store stock prices for 30 days, you will have to declare 30 variables. To handle such situations, you need arrays. You can store all the 30 values in one variable, in one array. Arrays also allow you to organize data in such a way that it can be easily accessed and manipulated. For example, if closing stock prices for March 2010 are stored in an array, it is easy to compute the average stock price for that month in about less than 5 lines of code. Also, the data stored in arrays can be easily sorted and searched. Creating one-dimensional array. So here, type is the base type, the type of data that the array will hold. The size is the size of the array, the number of elements the array will hold. So in this example, I am creating an array called stock prices, and the array will have 10 elements. Once the array is created, its length is fixed. Each item in an array is called an element, and each element is accessed by its numerical index. As shown in this illustration, numbering begins with 0, not 1. So, for example, the 9th element would therefore be accessed by an index of 8. For an array which has a size of 10, the valid indexes are between 0 and 9. In this example, we are creating an array of size 4 and then assigning values to each element. In a real world situation, you will probably read the stock prices from a database or a file. Here we are accessing the first and the third elements of the array. Keep in mind that the first element always has an index of 0 and the last element has an index of size -1, in this case 3. If you ever use an index outside of that range, 0 to size -1, your program will crash. In Visual Basics terminology, it will throw an exception. Here is an example of that happening. I'm trying to access the 5th element by providing an index of 4. So when you run that application, this is what you would get. It says index out of range exception was unhandled. So your application basically crashed. Let's take a side trip. I want to introduce a class which is part of the .NET. The name of the class is called random, and it can be used for generating random numbers. So this is how a random object is created. So R is the random object, and the object R has many methods that can be used to generate different types of random numbers. One method called next takes two arguments, the upper limit and the lower limit. So this would generate, every time you call this method, it will generate a random number between 20 and 29, not inclusive of 30. So when I run this twice, I call it twice, the first time I get 23, the second time I get 27. If you run the same example, you may not get the same numbers like 23 and 27, but you will get numbers somewhere between 20 and 29. So this is how you can generate random numbers in your application for that location. Here is an array example. Here I have declared a variable called stock prices, which will have 30 elements and are a random object for generating random numbers. Whenever you are working with an array, here is a convenient way of looking at each element, no matter what you want to do with each element. In this example, I set up a for loop which begins at 0 and ends at length -1, which means it'll generate all the valid indexes for that array, 0 through 29 in this case. And what I'm doing is filling that array with random numbers that are going to be between 20 and 29. Then I have another loop, a similar loop, but in this case it is going to be extracting the numbers that are stored in the array and printing them. I suggest you try this example. Creating two-dimensional arrays. I have a table of numbers. I have two dimensions here. I want to store test scores for various tests for various students. So one dimension is the student, the other dimension is the test. So I got 5 tests and 4 students. So I'm going to create a two-dimensional array called scores. The first index, the first dimension 5 is referring to the test. The second dimension 4 is referring to the students. So once I fill that array, then I can ask the question, what is Linda's score on test number 4? So test number 4 corresponds to an index of 3, and Linda is the third student, which means it corresponds to the index number 2. So when I run that code, when I run that statement, the answer is 86, which will pull up Linda's score on test number 4. Okay, so that was a quick introduction to arrays. We have 2 more topics coming up, one on classes and one more on building a Windows application. Please visit my site techedguru.com. It contains tutorials on many programming languages like Visual Basic, C#, Java, PHP, and XML. Thank you for listening.